Good afternoon. I'll call this meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's move on to public comment. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have one public commenter this afternoon. How much time can we allot?
Let's do 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Connie Jackson. I don't have the topic available to us, so we'll just have to guess, I suppose.
I doubt that anybody's unaware of what I'm speaking about. Good morning, School Board Chair, Mr. Superintendent, school board members. I'm pretty sure you all know what I'm going to be speaking about. I'm going to be asking for a raise. I'm very aware and appreciative that the superintendent has found a way to give a 1.1% bonus to all employees and the 1.1% raise. And we really do appreciate that. Any raise is a good raise. But we would like to ask for a great raise. I think that the millage rate, I know that the millage rate has not been raised in the last 10 years, and there is 1.1 available because of the cap at 20. And I've spoken with a lot of parents and a lot of educators, a lot of bus drivers, parapros, custodians, and cafeteria workers and others. And the real consensus is that it's time. It's time that we put our money where our hearts are, and that's back into our education system. People understand that public education is the foundation of our society, and that everything that we do depends on that. Our children, this is going to sound so corny, our children are our future, and I'm not going to sing. But if we do not support our public education system, our house prices will drop. Our county will fall even further down than it is. We're 9th in starting salaries. And that's just in teacher pay. I hesitate to look where we would be if we looked at bus drivers, custodians, food service, and all the others. We have an incredible shortage in our subs. We have teachers that haven't had planning in weeks because they're covering for other classes. I think that if we do this millage rate increase, put the money there, along with the 1.1% raise, we could give a decent raise. And then we could take that bonus money and raise the sub pay. And I think that would really fix two things. It would give a raise to the employees that would help us retain and attract the best, not just in teachers, but in bus drivers, custodians, and all the rest. And then we could use the bonus, and let's get the sub problem fixed. Let's look at it, make it go away, and let's make sure that teachers have the things they need. A planning period where they can collaboratively plan and make classroom lessons the best that they can be. I implore you, I know that a lot of you don't believe in it, but I think that it really is the best step. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Is that ready? Okay. Next, we have the approval of the minutes from the April 19th, 2018 board meeting. If there are no objections to the approval, they are approved. Now we are ready to hear board business. Let's begin with Mr. Ragsdale. You want to start the Development Authority?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As has been established as the practice, when the Development Authority has projects that are before them that deal with tax abatements and those kind of things, they come and present during a board meeting to the board. It really is informational, but making sure that the board has received the correct, timely, and appropriate information. So at this point in time, I'll ask Mr. Nelson Jeter to come forward and introduce all those that are here and the projects, and then take us through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Again, I'm Nelson Jeter, the Executive Director for the Development Authority of Cobb County. Thank you, Mr. Wheeler, and the rest of the board for allowing us to present what we consider to be two exciting projects for Cobb County. The first of which you're very familiar with, and that's the Kroger development. This project is a $35 million project that will net out 240 new jobs to our community. I'm going to ask Mr. Brian Fertizzi, who's the developer of the project, and also Ms. Yvonne Johnson, who represents Kroger, to come up and present.
Good afternoon, school board, chairman, superintendent, and board members. Again, my name is Brian Fertizzi. I am with Connolly Development. We are the master developer of what we're calling Marketplace Terrell Mill. This is a project located at the intersection of Terrell Mill and Powers Ferry Road. Consists of 9 individual parcels that we've assembled, totaling 24 acres. Brumby School is part of the assemblage, as is a 1970s developed office park. Most of what constitutes the 24 acres is older, functionally obsolete, and through the assemblage and bringing in Kroger, who we're super excited to have as part of the development and anchoring our development, we're looking to improve what we're considering one of the gateways to East Cobb. And so we've worked very closely with the neighborhoods, Terrell Mill Powers, or Powers Ferry Corridor Alliance, they changed their name recently, and Commissioner Ott to design a cohesive, pedestrian-friendly mixed-use development that incorporates pedestrian walking paths, architecture and landscape controls that will enable all of the, you can go to the next one there, that one's fine, that will enable all of the buildings, the outparcels, the shops, the residential units to use similar architectural features, designs, colors, so that it gives it a unified, cohesive design, as opposed to other developments that might have mismatched kind of one-off development outparcels. The development consists of a 95,000 square foot Kroger, which is, Yvonne, if you want to point to that, that's got our anchor. And then just off of that, we've got luxury residential units, 298 in total. We have a self-storage facility that will be skinned from the exterior to look like an extension of the multifamily units. Then we've got a handful of outparcels and some shop space that run along Terrell Mill and Powers Ferry that will complete the project. One thing that came up in the development of this was how do we improve or how do we handle the traffic situation? So one thing that we've done is we'll be installing 2 new traffic lights, one that will be on Powers Ferry, closer here, yep, and that will line up directly across the street with the main entrance to Micro Center. And the other signal that will go in will be lined up directly across the entrance from the LA Fitness Center. What this will do is this will enable, between the LA Fitness Center, Marketplace Terrell Mill, and the Micro Center, it will enable over 55 retailers to be connected through our concourse that we're creating, enabling all of those people co-shopping at those to avoid the main intersection of Terrell Mill and Powers Ferry Road. Nelson mentioned the project being a $35 million project. That's the Kroger portion of the project. The entire project is $120 million in value. And the tax abatement that we are seeking is only for the Kroger portion. Also important to note that the portion that we're asking for the abatement on is currently tax exempt. And looking at benefits to the school board in the way of the taxes that benefit the school board, currently this property is putting forth $40,000 of tax benefit to the school board. Once complete, it will be $593,000 $1,000 annual tax benefit to the school board. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Yvonne. She can give you a little bit of information on what the Kroger will look and feel like, and then we can answer any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Yvonne Johnson. I'm one of the real estate managers for Kroger at the Atlanta division. So what we're proposing here, as you know, we have a existing 45,000 square foot older store that's roughly about 40 years old. It does not have a fuel center. It does not have drive-through pharmacy. So what we'd like is to actually get a larger footprint to better suit the community. It's roughly about 100,000 square feet, 95,000 net, but it's proposed to have a fuel center out front. We're having drive-through pharmacy at it, and the newly click list is also part of the development. And what we're looking for is actually to provide additional services that we're able to do in the larger locations. Again, this is almost double the size of the existing location, so we'll be able to facilitate a lot more needs, a larger pharmacy, a larger nutrition department, larger floral, which a lot of people like. So we're looking forward to actually adding a lot of improvements to the community.
And just real quick, one last thing to close out. In addition to the 2 signals that we're going to be installing at our expense, we're not looking for any help or abatement on those. Being next to the power substation that is going to be just north of the Kroger, there are a tremendous amount of underground and overhead power lines that run all throughout the property that are extremely expensive to relocate. So with Kroger seeking the tax incentives, that will help us offset the cost to relocate the power lines.
Thank you. Board, anybody have any questions? Mr. Scamhorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick curiosity, is Powers Ferry the bottom street?
Yes.
Okay, then you've got that little wing coming out there. Where is Delk Road? I assume it's at the end of that.
Well, Delk Road would maybe be another quarter mile, maybe a half mile.
Oh, well, so you're
north of
moving
that.
Kroger way in then.
We're moving Kroger from Delk closer to Terrell Mill.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then, if I may ask, what's going to happen with all that property? Is that being sold?
The former Kroger or the existing Kroger?
Former Kroger.
Kroger does not own that. They're a tenant. It's owned by an individual developer who's purchased that, and they'll backfill it or redevelop it. I'm not sure what their plans are.
Okay.
Kroger will remain in there until this is ready for them, and they'll move in over the weekend. And
Okay. And what is your start date that you'd like?
so we will look to break ground probably August or September
Of this
of
year?
this year. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Show us where the current school is located. All that's the current school.
Exactly yes, exactly where you see the Kroger and their parking field is where the school is.
Okay. Now, is this going to be, this new store is going to be, is it going to be on the same level as the Kroger Superstore in Hilton Head?
I'll let you take that.
If we built it today, I would say yes, but because it's another year or 2 off, I can tell you it'll be the latest and greatest that we have in the next year or 2.
Okay. Now, is there just one developer for this entire complex, or the multiple developers in play on this? Are there multiple players in this whole development?
Connolly Development, our firm, is the master developer, so we have all 24 acres under contract, and we'll be developing all 24 acres.
Okay, so you're going to do it all at one time?
It will be phased. We're going to start with everything kind of south of the Kroger, if you will, and that will be our phase 1. As Yvonne mentioned, Kroger might lag by maybe 18 to 24 months. Brumby School will come down immediately once they've vacated, and we'll mass grade the entire site and start development.
Okay, I can't tell from here, but are the condos on the backside of?
The residential units are on the back. They back up to Salem Ridge, a townhome community, with a
Okay.
50-foot buffer filled with trees in between.
Okay, in the left-hand corner, what is that?
That's
All- all the-
a self-storage
no,
facility.
All the, not your left, my left. Yeah, what is all that?
That's an upscale self-storage facility.
Okay.
And that will be skinned to look like an extension of the multifamily units.
Okay. And you say $120 million when it's all completed,
Yes, sir.
and completion date for the entire complex is scheduled for what date?
We'll probably deliver phase one in about 18 to 24 months, and then Kroger might be another 18 to 24 months beyond that. Does that sound right?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Ms. Thayer?
Thank you. Thanks for being here, and we appreciate this. But can you tell us more about the multifamily housing, because that will impact our schools?
Well, there was a study that we submitted across, I think, 5 or 6 different similar projects. These are all 1 and 2 bedrooms. We won't have a single 3-bedroom unit in here. We're going to be marketing towards millennials and empty nesters. They're going to be extremely expensive, and the study we did targets there to be, I think it was under 5 or under 6 school-age children from this development.
So you're not planning this at all for children then? It's not going to be?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Mr. Scamahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick follow-up. You said the current Kroger is being leased, correct?
Yes.
And been over 40 years, that must have been a pretty penny, but I digress. But have you got a commitment from those that own that property not to turn that into a thrift store? I mean, I know there's zoning issues and all that, but
So, no, we do not, and we can't put that commitment on them. We can't put deed restrictions on the property. Again, it's a leased property, so when our lease is up, we're
Okay.
out.
okay. Okay, well, I like thrift stores, so it's okay. So, but I would think that would impact that development, whatever happens to that.
It would, but again, once we turn it over to him, he's kind of free to do what he wants to do
Sure.
with it as long as it's within
Okay,
the guidelines.
thank you.
You're welcome.
You're not concerned about it?
Yes and no. I'm concerned it may be a competitor, but am I concerned it may be a thrift store? No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scamahorn. Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one more question. The abatement, you said was only the current school property, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So how would the abatement phase in? Is it over a period of time, or?
It's over a 10-year period, and it escalates 10% each year.
It's the standard 10-year abatement schedule that we use on all of our projects in Cobb County. The first year would be 0, and then that would be a 10% build up until it reaches 100%.
Okay, but the abatement process, right now, it's exempt. Will it stay exempt until you actually complete the Kroger project?
Well, basically, since there are no taxes on the property now because it's a school tax, under typical arrangements where we have properties being taxed, we invoke pilot payments, and it's a way to keep the taxing jurisdictions neutral.
Right.
But since there are no taxes being paid on it, all the taxes, even during the abatement, will be new taxes towards all the taxing jurisdictions.
But if I understand you correctly, we're talking about 4 to 6 years before we would actually start the abatement process.
Actually, the abatement process, in many senses, when property is converted to the development authority, it's no longer taxable. During the construction phase, it's not taxable, and during the first year of the abatement period. So, to answer your questions, it depends upon basically the construction timeline associated with the project. and it varies depending upon the size of the project.
Okay, so we're still 4 to 6 years before we actually see any tax money coming in as a result of this project.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, board?
Let me clarify that, but that's just on the Kroger piece, because the other part of the development is not within the abatement schedule, so that will remain taxable.
Right, and I was concerned about the school property that's now exempt, and what you're telling me is going to be exempt for another 4 to 6 years, as far as taxing is concerned.
Potentially, yes.
Okay, and I do like the project. I think you've done a great job, and it looks good. I think the community will really benefit in the long run for an upscale Kroger, and I've been in one, like I mentioned, in Hilton Head. That's the only one I've ever seen. But I tell you, when you go in, it's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. And really, I just want to say that what this does, it really highlights, the importance of this type of economic development within our county. And each member of the board has heard me say this, but this broader commercial development throughout the county is going to improve our digest in the long run. And the thing about the abatements is it does permit developers to maybe reach a little bit and make it a higher and greater use for the property. The continued growth of the commercial digest within our county is going to be important relative to the overall budget and the financing for the Cobb County School District. I've made numerous comments about just the difference between, for example, Marietta and Cobb County, the two school systems. Marietta enjoys about a $1,400 per student local funding advantage relative to Cobb County, and it's largely because of the commercial digest in ratio to the students within the school systems. And I know I heard you say the amount that the taxable property is generating today, and that is how much?
For the school system, I think he mentioned $40,000.
$40,000, and projected to be
593.
500. Yeah, that's a significant delta. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anybody else? Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
The second project that we want to present to you today is one that you probably read about in the newspaper, and I guess you guys wonder sometimes, how do we come up with these names? I think the last time it was Meatloaf, and now it's Dashboard. But we have to sign non-disclosure agreements on projects when the client requests, in order to keep the project very confidential. This will be the second largest economic development project that we've had the fortunate to be considered for since I've been working in this arena. This is a $264 million development that will bring 863 new jobs to our county with an average salary of $100,000. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jack DiNardo, who represents the client. Also, as the bond counsel, Mr. Bruce McCall, and also with the development company, Mr. Jack Hirsch. Mr. DiNardo will provide the presentation.
Members of the board, appreciate your time to discuss Project Dashboard in some more detail. As Mr. Jeter mentioned, this is a ongoing evaluation of the company, so there are certainly negotiations and evaluation that is present right now, and because of that, there are some information we're not going to be able to share. However, you guys have been made aware of some of the job assumptions and the purpose of this facility. If there's any questions, we're obviously happy to answer what we can.
Questions? Mr. Scammahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Jeter, you mentioned real quick, and it's a curiosity question, but on the application, it says size of the project, $110 million. I think you quoted 200 and something million.
Well, I'm sorry. There are actually two pieces to the equation. From a bonding perspective, we'll have two properties that will be owned by two different owners. One of which is $130 million that will be owned by the client, and the other one is a $134 million that will be owned by the developer. But both partials will be used by the client. So the total for both bonds will be $264 million. I should have clarified that. I apologize.
No problem. That's why you pay me the big money. So, another curiosity question, if you can answer it. What part of the county, in reference to the school, impact to the schools, what part of the county will this be developed?
It's being developed near the Braves development, near the Battery.
Oh, in the Battery?
No, not in the Battery, but in close proximity to the Battery.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scammerhorn. Anybody else? Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give us the timeline as far as when you're planning on starting and when you think you'll have this completed and when will you have the staffing completed?
I can't. I could speak to the fact that, this is the location decision is still being evaluated. So I think the first thing that the company is trying to accomplish is make a location decision, and that's expected sometime this summer. And then it's the company's intention that construction would be completed shortly after that. And obviously construction would have to be the first thing to be completed to start the job creation.
Well, let me drill down a little bit further. When you start construction, how long do you think, is this going to be a multi-building or facility, or is it going to be one facility?
Yeah, the main focus of this project is a research and development facility, and then there'll also be a engineering center next to the R&D facility.
Okay. So is this a 2-year project to develop all this facility, or a 3-year, or you think it'll be shorter than that?
There's a process and a timeline that the company's laid out. Unfortunately, some of that information I can't share at this time, but those things have been thought through by the company.
I'm trying, but it sounds enticing. And what you're saying is these are high-level positions that you're going to be employed. Over 800, is that the right number eventually?
Yeah, I can confirm the net new jobs to the company is 863.
Is this a startup company or is it already in existence?
It's a manufacturing company with operations currently in Georgia and in a number of other states as well.
Okay, all right. I'm looking forward to seeing what it's going to be. Do you have what will dictate when you announce what the project is actually going to be to the public?
Sure. So there's a number of kind of administrative things that we're working through as part of that evaluation process that I mentioned, as well as some kind of negotiation items, and all of those are kind of working towards completion right now. They're in process, and all things lead to a decision being made sometime this summer.
There's an MDJ reporter over to your right. He would definitely like to have all that information. So, but I do appreciate it, and I think one thing that I don't think you did give me, what will be the total tax? I think it's in here somewhere that we will receive in the 10-year, 11-year cycle.
The total projected taxes, even with the abatement schedule over a 10-year period, I believe it's about $21 million.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scammerhorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick follow-up. I heard it's going to be just outside the Battery. Then I heard it's to be determined. So it's going to be in the area?
No, I think to be determined. It will be within close proximity of the battery.
Okay. So I take it they're in need of the freeway and 75 to 85.
I think that makes the site very attractive, yes.
Okay. You're being very careful. I noticed that. So, and when's the announcement that we can go public on this?
Again, I think it comes down to the the schedule that the company's laid out in terms of making a decision first. So they anticipate a decision this summer, and an announcement would follow shortly there.
Early fall?
I can't really speculate, although what's been communicated is they want to make a decision, and then would certainly
Okay.
likely announce right after that.
Well, I would think we'd want to be expedient because every month that they're not here is a month they lose the revenue. So I would think that they would want to make the announcement as soon as possible. Would you not agree to that?
I believe the intention is to announce as soon as the location is determined.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Again, thank you, Chairman Wheeler and the rest of the board for allowing us the opportunity to present to you this afternoon. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Jeter. Appreciate it. We'll go on to our next item, which is Georgia School Board item. Mr. Sweeney will defer to you at this time to update the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Upcoming in June, the Georgia School Board Association will be having its annual conference, and I've been chosen by the chair as the delegate to that conference. And earlier was circulated a position of legislative priorities by the Georgia School Board Association. And those are legislative priorities that are voted upon by the entire Georgia School Board Association at its annual conference. And so they'll be reviewing those and then adopting those on a go-forward basis. Many of those legislative priorities have been in place for many years. Each of you, I believe, were delivered a copy of the proposed changes, and they will be discussing those on the delegation floor at the conference. So that's the report.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Mr. Morgan, we've got Parent Engagement Committee. I believe you're appointed to that.
Yes. Good afternoon.
Welcome.
What'd you say?
So welcome.
Welcome, brother. Good afternoon, everybody. Ooh. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Appreciate it, man. Come on, man.
Come on. Burning daylight. Let's go.
That's all right. I'm just going to sit here now. Oh, man. So anyway, appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair. Just want to add some energy in here, man. I get kind of zoned out a little bit. Right. So I deeply believe, and I'm convicted, that until we fully take advantage of the parent opportunity that we have in this school district, as I said to you guys at our retreat, in my mind, the best relationships, professional, personal, otherwise, you have an expectation and you have accountability. And I think everyone is well aware that I believe that we can do more around the issue of parent engagement in our school district. To that point, what I would like to propose, my colleagues and Mr. Superintendent, is that the Cobb County School District put together a diverse committee to study the issue of parent engagement and involvement. Our current practices, what we can do better, and taking a deep dive into what others might be doing that we can infuse to what we do in our school district. The other thing I would like to say about this is I would propose that this committee bring back recommendations, or whatever you want to call it, January 2019, And finally, I most definitely want to be a part of that committee. I yield.
Questions? Ms. Thayer?
Mr. Morgan, I'm not sure I was clear on something. The purpose of the committee is to delve into ways to more effectively involve parents, and that would be the end of their goal, right? Not ways to improve the county in all facets.
This committee is solely focusing on, parent engagement, involvement. It will run its course in January 2019. They will bring back recommendations about what practices we might be able to infuse into our school district.
Okay. At first, I wasn't sure whether they were going to come back with ways we could improve the county, or they were just going to focus on ways to improve parental involvement, or ways to more effective ways to encourage parental involvement in our schools.
Correct.
So that would be the sole goal of this committee, would be to make recommendations of effective practices or something of that nature. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Morgan, are you anticipating all schools to be part of this initiative, or certain schools that may not have a high participation rate?
So I think the best route, best approach, it would not necessarily be all schools in all participation. I think the best way to choose these members would be the superintendent chooses, I would say, no less than 7, no more than 15. He chooses that committee, as I said, from various walks of life, so we can get good diversity of thought. So it would be 15 people, and I'm sure it would be a wide array of people and experiences and encounters and things of that nature.
I have a question. We've had this discussion several times over the last 2 or 3 years, and I understand your desire to have more parent engagement, because hopefully it will help the student in the long run, not only from a personal standpoint, but also from an academic standpoint. Now, my question is, would it be better for you as a board member to create this committee, or do you want this board itself to create a committee, or do you want the superintendent to create a committee?
The superintendent. I think that simplifies the situation, and that way we can execute it without a lot of, other logistical things that might come up if it's too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Chair, just as a technical point, the policy would say that the chair has to pick all the committee, but I think I'm hearing the discussion, we can say the chair is fine if the superintendent sort of picks up that ball and rolls with it and moves forward sort of along the framework that you all are discussing.
Couldn't we make a motion for that to be legally effective?
I think it's effective. I think there's, and I'm not going to say it's an informal action. You could, but I don't know that you have to unless your group wants to do that.
Okay.
Ms. Thayer?
Whoever appoints the representatives on the committee, I assume we would have leadership represented from elementary, middle, and high, so that if parents came up with more responsibility at the school level, we would have representatives on there to be able to talk about whether the schools could handle that or not. Would you see that was in the consideration of it? Okay, great. Then I would be happy.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Mr. Scamahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could ask Mr. Morgan, and I know the particulars may not be down on paper yet, but would you propose that this committee go around the different schools?
I think it'd be a variety of opportunities. I think that'll be a part of what they do, but I think there'll be other ways as well that we can also find other potential avenues in addition to maybe going to different schools.
Would it be safe to say that the committee could come back and that we're doing all we can do? Would you accept that?
Yeah, if that's what they come back and say. Yeah, I have to accept it, but I think that putting forth the effort, it would say a lot about our commitment to seeing what we do well and what we might be able to improve.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scamhorn. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess in a broader sense, what I'd like to understand is every board member here wants to see greater parental involvement. I don't think there's a member here. We already went down a discussion as to why it made no sense for us to mandate parental involvement. We had that discussion already. So I guess the question becomes is what is the net product, or what is the net result of this committee? Are you looking for a board policy recommendation? Are you looking for this committee to impart certain things on individual schools? And I guess it could be determined by the committee, but I think in order to have a committee for this purpose, it really does have to have a clear focus, and again, for also a specified period of time. I mean, it's not just an open-ended committee. Those would be my recommendations.
Yes, that's why I said this is the third time that it will bring back its recommendations January 2019. And also the focus will solely be what do we currently do in terms of parent engagement involvement, what others might do. When I say others, that could be other school districts, other entities, and bring back whatever recommendations it might be and say, hey, this is what we found, this is what we want to make. Board, you can do what you will, but these are the recommendations that we bring forth to you as it relates to parent engagement and involvement.
Ms. Thayer?
Okay, I second Mr. Morgan's motion.
I was going to say, if there's no objection from the board, Mr. Ragsdale step up and take that with Mr. Morgan. Can you join with him and proceed forward? If there's no objection, well, that's where they'll go. All right, Mr. Morgan, you're up next again with teacher pay issues.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. I actually have a slideshow, and I've given a lot of thought to this. You know what I'm sorry, I mistakenly hit the thing. I didn't mean to hear it. I'm calling it shortchanged. I'm speaking to anybody that's an employee of the Cobb County School District. It is my position, my belief, my opinion that when it comes to pay, employees are being shortchanged. In the next, I got 14, 15 slides, I'm going to try to make the case. But more importantly, I'm talking directly to you who might be watching this meeting or might watch this meeting or hear about this meeting, about my beliefs about how we could go about improving pay in our school district in this budget cycle. Next slide. One of my favorite quotes. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, it never will. That's the way of the world. You don't make a demand, you won't get it. Period. I don't believe that there's a large enough drumbeat right now about addressing the issue of pay in our school district. If there were, then I think our reality would be different when it comes to pay. By the way, it's Frederick Douglass. This is what all too many elected officials do. Look at your face, bro. Put the head in the sand. Just put it in the sand. One of my favorite lines out of a movie was, everybody wants to be a gangster, until you have to do gangster things. Teacher Appreciation Week. We appreciate you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you. Oh, we love our teachers. The convenient thing to do, just put your head in the sand. The reality. What's our current reality? I'm talking about the Cobb County School District. I'm not talking about the state. I'm not talking about the federal government. I'm talking about the Cobb County School District. There it is. Salaries. 0 to 10 years, we're 9th. And I'm looking at school districts. I look at the Cobb. Have a higher millage rate. They had a superintendent locked up. Atlanta, cheating scandal. I know that things got willy-nilly in Fulton for a minute about pay, but they had to go to court to try to get some money. Clayton lost their accreditation. Mr. Sweeney mentioned this when other people were here. It's just mind-boggling to me that when I look at Marietta, I say we have 100,000, over 100,000 more students than them, yet our pay lags. That's just not right. Cobb teacher salaries, this is quoted, have declined somewhat relative to our metro Atlanta peers at the starting and late career levels. We risk eventually lagging the market at these salary levels, currently 7th or 9th out of 12th. That's the reality. It's not made up. It's not some think tank. That's the reality. Got another quote for you. Continued attention to salaries is highly recommended in order for Cobb to remain competitive with our peers. Oh, this let me know I need glasses. And thus be able to attract and retain excellent teachers. I didn't make that up. That came from a deputy superintendent when we all received a report about salaries. Facts. So my son is 22, and he teaches me all the latest lingo. So some of the lingo now is that if David Chastain said something I agreed with, he would say facts. So if I said, for example, I'm dressed very well, you would say facts. As always. There you go.
That doesn't make it so, though. But I do like your suit.
Thank you. If a high school principal in Gwinnett County came to work in Cobb County, and kept their salary, they would be the second highest paid person in the entire school district. Think about that. Think about that. Second, baby. 165, second. That's a fact. That's what that makes me. Mad. Tell you what else makes me mad. Teaching is one of the few professions, if not the only profession, where the top 1%, y'all, the top 1%, or people who have additional responsibilities have no more earning power and or opportunities than the lower quarter of their colleagues. You know why? Because our heads are in the sand. Because that's just how it's always been. Nobody wants to adjust. Nobody wants to address it. That's not right. What do I want to accomplish? Add to the pay of the men and women who are employees of the Cobb County School District in this year's budget beyond what is currently being proposed. I want to be abundantly clear. I'm not up here just a bunch of rhetoric. As a matter of fact, I brought 3 very specific proposals. Proposal 1 for increasing pay. Teachers and principals who earn an overall 4, which is top 1%, on their evaluations get an additional $1,500 bonus. Start as a proof of concept. Start at a high needs, elementary, middle, and high. Why? That's where we have our highest teacher turnover. If we're talking 30 people who earn a 4 between an elementary, middle, and high, 30 times 1,500 is, what's 30 times 1,500? Brad Johnson is figuring it out while I go to the next. 45,000. Right there. Out of $1 billion. That's one way. Specific idea. Earn a 4, pick 3 schools as a proof of concept. Roll CTLS out, proof of concept. Literacy, proof of concept. This, proof of concept for $45,000. Anticipating your feedback. Good thing about working with people a long time, sometimes you can anticipate what they're going to already say, baby. First one, the cost. We already covered that one, $45K. The collectors. The evaluators. One of the things that I find very fascinating, if you look through history, is people who want to keep the status quo, what they do, they make outliers seem like the entire narrative. I hear all the time how excellent our principals are around the school district. How excellent they are. So we trust them enough, principals, to say, you need to evaluate everybody in this building, whether you earn a 1, 2, 3, or 4. But some kind of way, when they award someone a 4 and you attach money to it, oh, stop. Is there risk involved because of the human element of it? Yes. But you know what else is risk involved in, Brad? Freedom. Because you and I as Americans have freedom. It's some people out there today that's going to do some bad stuff, unfortunately. It's some people that's going to go to jail, rob, steal. But when you look at freedom in its totality, it overwhelms the bad apples that we have. Because we have people in our school district who are earning 4s, to me, it outweighs, well, you know what, somebody might get it wrong. But we're talking about our top 1%. The conundrum. You do know that we use evaluations to fire people, right? Am I correct? We use them to fire people, right? So how is it we can use it to fire somebody, but we can't use that same evaluation to say, you earned a 4 bonus? If you can use it for the bad stuff, use it for the good stuff. Second proposal. Newcomer of the year. Defined as a teacher with 0 to 3 years teaching experience. Get a $1,000 bonus. If they are selected by their peers, I'm talking about the entire staff, using the same process that we use for Teacher of the Year, as best newcomer in their school. 114 schools, $1,000, it's $114,000. Great way to say when we have job fairs, hey, you know, if you if you're newcomer of the year, the Cobb County School District gives you a $1,000 bonus. Feedback. The payout. Anticipating feedback. $114K. I've talked about 2 proposals that hadn't even added up to $200K. The principal. Principals don't want to do this. Guess what, y'all? This ain't a principal program. This is for teachers. Teachers choose Teacher of the Year. It's a principal. It's a teacher. Teachers will have ownership of this. Newcomer of the Year. the pool. What if you don't have but 3 newcomers? Well, you have certain people graduate from high school this year, John Adams, and I think that they might not have a graduating class of 100. They still choose a valedictorian. They still choose a salutatorian. They don't say, well, because 50 of y'all graduating and 700 of y'all graduating. And if you don't have a newcomer that's that great, don't write anybody's name down. I think, again, it's a creative way to think out of the box to reward our teachers. Talked about 4s, the proof of concept. Talked about newcomers. Last one. This is my last proposal. I don't know if y'all remember I used that one before. Elephant in the room. Stick your head in the sand. Ladies and gentlemen, those are current millage rates in Metro Atlanta. I've learned that the cab in Atlanta was grandfathered in. That's why theirs is over 20. We can, as our public speaker commented, could raise it 1.1 million. All right. It's my last slide. Well, next to last slide. Especially people who might hear this or see this. If y'all don't hear anything else, hear what I'm about to tell y'all about this right here. So, the last SPLOST that was voted on had a budget of 700 or a little bit over $700 million. Right? It's due to run for 5 years. We will approximate that will be $140 million per year. It passed in every precinct overwhelmingly. It passed by that in large part because of the employees of this school district. So, the employees of this school district is largely responsible for $700 million of capital improvements that we don't have to incur. But then if those same employees, on a sales tax now, a tax, if those same employees turn around and say, hey, man, can you put another $25 million in the general fund for a 2.5% raise across the board? We say no. That is called being shortchanged. They do the $700 million. They ask for 25. We say no. Whether it's emails, phone calls, whether you agree or disagree, I just want there to be more communication. Because right now, I conclude this by saying, the waste. Sorry, I had some more. The waste. Anticipating the feedback. The waste about raising the millage. Government doesn't handle their money well. We don't handle our money well. So this is what I want to say right here. Brad Johnson has stood up here on many occasions and talked about administrative costs. Overhead. When you compare us to Atlanta and Gwinnett and DeKalb, it's way down. Our cost is way under most of those school districts. The money's certainly not going to salaries. I'm trying to find a waste, Chris. I'm trying to figure out where we're wasting it. The wreckage. What if we have an economic downturn? What if we have an economic downturn? The chances of us having an economic downturn in this budget cycle, David Banks, are the chances of Hitler making it to heaven. It ain't happening. It's not. So to say, well, we have to safeguard, it's not happening. Final one, the whimsical. Let y'all in on something. Whoever might be listening. It's a common practice in politics to put political preservation in front of doing what. I yield, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Scammahorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you would leave that slide up, because I want to get to that slide.
I'm in practice.
So, well, where to start? Let me start at the beginning. I can't repeat the quote, but you're welcome to put it back up there if you want. But I've got a quote that goes along with that too. He or she that has the most power has the least liberty, for he or she is the one most watched. I don't care what level. Think about it. If you're a custodial supervisor, food service, manager at Ace Hardware, everybody else is watching you. This organization, being a government organization, being a public organization, our finances are open to the public. They're posted on the website. I'm all ears as to doing things better, but we are more watched. I'm amazed at how many people watch the school board meeting. We are the most watched because we're using their money and educating their children. I have children and I have grandchildren. And yes, I'm part of the organization, but I'm also a taxpayer and a citizen. I'm also a former certified teacher, along with Ms. Thayer, Mr. Wheeler. We understand. In 2008 or 2009, they asked us to vote on whether we would forgo pay raise or furloughs. And the word I got, and I voted to forego the pay raise so that nobody would lose their job. Now, a couple of years later, it got where we had to furlough some folks. But to indict this system, our organization as well as it's run, is not appropriate. There's other things besides money. Since this board is fairly stable. Ms. Thayer and Mr. Chastain have been on the board for 4 years, the rest of us longer. And ever since I've been on the board, we have worked diligently, and I know Dr. Hinojosa, Mr. Ragsdale's predecessor, Mr. Ragsdale, I'm going to name names, Mr. Daniels, Mr. Adams, Ms. Stoddard. We work to improve our work environment from top to bottom, bottom to top. If money is the all-important thing, then let's forego the work, the leaky roofs, the better technology, the whatever, the camaraderie that's built, where we help people develop rather than run them out the door, where we put teams together. Yes, I'm sure there are places we don't know about that could use improvement. We're a really large organization. But, and I know those that pay, whether it's Gwinnett or whatever, this is not to besmirch them. You get what organizations have to pay to get people, whether, again, Ace Hardware, Home Depot, or school organizations. And those folks may be making more money, but they're earning every penny of it. And if they're not, the taxpayers ought to be outraged. We have a great work environment. We have great things. And other people go other places. But guess what? A lot of them come back. Bear with me, Mr. Chair. I've got more to go here. Discipline. This county, this organization has the best discipline. I'll put it up against anybody. And when I say discipline, I don't mean just teacher-student discipline. I also mean our law enforcement right there, our layers of security. We take security paramount. We're in the process of adding security systems that other school systems can only envy. So we want money. Okay, let's forego that. Let's just throw it all into salaries and forget everything else. You want more money? All right. How many teachers want more students? We can forego hiring, replacing teachers, and increase the teacher-student ratio. Ridiculous, but that's an option if we want to do it. Choices have to be made with a budget. This is a public organization. As I've explained to other people, the pie gets only so big each year. Sometimes it decreases, sometimes it increases. This year it increased by $10 million. And what did the superintendent and staff do? We immediately applied it to our staff, to our teachers and our staff. I don't know how much better you can get at that than that. We went, and I've heard we went through the recession on the backs of teachers. Yes, we did, but it was on the backs of everybody else too, including my neighbors. We all went through that recession. We all suffered. Everybody got furloughed, whether you're, again, look at Home Depot, Ace Hardware, school systems. Some school systems hurt more than others. But to indict or try to indict this organization that we did something wrong and that we got through the recession on the backs of teachers is absolutely inappropriate. We got through the recession because we're human beings and you do what you have to do to get through it. It doesn't matter where you are, what your status is. Now, more to the slide presentation. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, there was 12 with all fours, I think is the example. So if we, and I'm not against paying for merit work, but you're going to get unintended consequences because once you start paying for that, there are a lot of people out there that are doing great work. They understand that there has to be an evaluation system, and it's more or less I don't know how well you're doing. But you start paying for levels, you better start getting a lot of money because a lot of people are going to change gears and want a piece of that big pie. Now, I got two more things. If you work for somebody else, you're going to get paid what the going rate is. Using a sports analogy, why did those guys and girls on the girls' teams get $150 million? Some of them only get $50 million. Some start out, the baseball players, I don't know, Mr. Morgan, what's a brand new Major League Baseball player start out generally, $150,000?
No, the average salary in Major League Baseball is $5 million.
Not average. What's the new guy get?
The new guy depends on what it is.
Okay, he gets paid.
Average.
He gets paid the going rate that depending on his skill level.
Yes,
Okay.
which is probably right around $1 million.
Okay, but my point being is, if I quit teaching and go to work somewhere else, I'm going to get paid what the going rate is for that. Period. You know, what's police officers get? I bet a new police officer starts out at $150,000 a year. Well, okay, maybe $100,000 a year. Do I hear 50? Okay, so to say that we are deliberately shortchanging our teachers is ridiculous on its face. Last but not necessarily least, what I almost heard, I'm going to take it that you meant well, but was offended that we are wasting money. We're a large organization. I'm sure there is some waste. But to indict our senior staff and our finance department that we're willy-nilly wasting money is, again, inappropriate. I would put Mr. Brad Johnson and his staff up against anybody in the United States of America. And I'm sure, and Brad is a very conservative person as far as money is concerned. In fact, we are operating on I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Johnson, we're operating on essentially a 1 month cushion. Is that correct? When I came on the board, the policy was 2 month cushion. Is that correct? We used to have a 2 month cushion.
It used to be slightly larger.
Okay, thank you. So we keep squeezing the orange and trying to get more out of it, but the orange is only so big. Mr. Chair, I apologize for going long, but there was a lot to cover, and I'm willing to listen to everybody else too. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scamhorn. Mr. Morgan, did you want to
Yes, a
respond?
couple brief things. First, I don't know if I said it incorrectly or not to my colleague, Mr. Scamahorn. I didn't say that we were wasting money. I said that one of the rebuttals I've had about why we can't do money and we don't do more is because we are wasting money. And my position is similar to yours, the same as yours. We're not wasting any money. So to say, I don't know how wires got crossed in that regard. The second quick point I'll make is this. Whether you're talking about fixing roofs or whatever the case might be, what I'm presenting is not an either-or proposition. I'm not saying, well, if you do this, you can't do that. I just put three proposals there that would not in any way, shape, or form compromise any of our current operational practices. So no, I wasn't saying that we were wasting money. I was saying the opposite. People say government wastes money, that's why you can't. No, it's the opposite. We are running a tight ship. Secondly, as I just said, I put proposals, very specific proposals that I think we can do right now to inject more into what we are paying our teachers and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Scamhorn, you responded. We've got
I just
Mr.
had
Sweeney
a
next.
brief one. I apologize. And maybe we can come back to it. I don't expect you to do it now. I guess I'm confused on where we're going to get the money to do what you need to do in order to improve our system. And I'll wait for that after others have spoken.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the spirit of the testing season, I have a pop quiz. And we're going to start with a couple of things, and I may indulge Mr. Johnson in a few responses here. True or false? The Cobb County School District is one of the largest public school systems in the United States to be debt-free. True or false? True. Okay. Secondly, Cobb County School District earned and has maintained a AAA credit rating. True or false? True. Okay. Mr. Johnson, could you share briefly why that is so difficult for a school district to attain?
Well, in government finance, fund balance is everything, and running a tight ship is everything. And so when the market looks at us, they're really looking at those two things. But in many cases, our competition for AAA rating, they have a far greater fund balance than we do. But still, they gave it to us because they looked at how the school district is run, and they looked at the finance department, they looked how we develop estimates, and they looked at our results of the financial statements.
And let me ask you another question. Isn't it also true that one of the reasons it's so difficult for school districts in particular to attain this is because of the, we'll call it the swings in revenue that school districts receive?
Our school district revenues are fixed in place for us based on formulas, and we're so when we have state formulas, they're out of our control basically, and it's basically earned based on formulas and student counts. The other main formulas are property digest, so we have little control over our revenue.
Okay. All right, another true and false question. Since 2008, the enrollment, or the FTE count as it is otherwise known, has increased by more than 7,000 students. The answer to that is true. since 2008. Independent auditors recommend that the CCSD maintain a minimum of 2 months reserves. And what that equates to is about 16.7% of the operating budget, which would be $167 million on a $1 billion budget. Is that accurate, Mr. Johnson?
That is true.
Okay. Today, where is the Cobb County School District in its reserves? And I know it's kind of a floating number, but where do you anticipate it will be by the year end?
It's a floating number, and we usually quote that because it's ever-changing. But as of last fiscal year, when we closed the audited books, the unassigned fund balance was 96 million, but the auditors recommend 2 months reserves, which is approximately $167 million. That is correct.
Okay. Here's another true-false question. Our tax digest in the county is anticipated to grow by 7.5%. And the Cobb County School District receives the full benefit of that 7.5% increase. The answer is false. Okay, and that really has to do in large part to the exemptions, the growing level of exemptions that we have in the county. The Cobb County School District has maintained an 18.9 millage rate since 2008. True or false? This is a bit of a trick question. The answer is actually false. For 3 years, the board actually had a millage rate that was 20, 20, and I believe 19.9. And we used those funds at that time by shoring up the difference between 18.9 mils and the higher millage rate to essentially balance our budget and using excess SPLOST funds. Okay, and it was really a challenge for us to do it at that time. Local funding for the CCSD has increased by a whopping $289,000 since fiscal year 2019 until fiscal year 2017. Local funding, $289,000 from 2019 until 2017. And again, with 7,000 more students.
2009.
It's from 2009 until 2017. The challenges I'm sharing here, and again, this board has demonstrated that it has listened to the wise counsel of our financial department, okay, to gain a AAA credit rating, to maintain a AAA credit rating, to give raises, very, very important raises to teachers when and where possible. The challenges that we have and will continue to have are going to be revenue issues. And the biggest thing, and I've been an advocate for a long time about this, is improvement in the commercial digest within Cobb County schools districts. That will help us more than anything else with regard to this. This school board also adopted legislative priorities. Those legislative priorities were for our legislators to act on our benefit, to go to the Georgia Capitol and say, enough of this fair share contribution. It needs to be capped at $100 million. Our contribution on fair share contribution has been $144 million in the most recent budget. Can you imagine what this school district could do with $44 million? All right, and those are big numbers. I think, and in speaking with the superintendent and in speaking with Brad Johnson, our CFO, some of the things that are really, really important for this community to understand is that the future of education financing in Cobb County is at peril. It's at risk. All right? More and more dollars are being torn away from public education and K-12 segment in particular. And when we hear about increases in funding and it's coming from the state level, largely it's coming because of increased enrollment, okay, more so than anything else. Fortunately, and this is the first year, the QBE formula has been fully funded. Even still, it is not getting us to where we need to be as a school district. During this whole time, that I've been on the Board of Education, I'm not aware of any adjustments that have been made to transportation from the state side, and that's a significant number. There has been significant increases for healthcare and also for the teacher retirement system. And those costs are borne by the school district. And again, the numbers I shared with you since 2009 till 2017 on the local funding element alone, $289,000 greater, which is not a lot of money. It doesn't go far. So we've been reliant on additional funding primarily from the state to shore things up. As far as economic downturns, not a whole lot of people were looking forward to 2008. A lot of people thought it was the gravy train and we're going to keep going and we're going to buy all kinds of homes and things like that. It can happen before you know it. If there is an economic downturn of any kind, the school district is going to have to rely on some level of resources essentially to shore up the school district from a personnel standpoint. We went through this before during the last recession. I remember RIFs in the neighborhood of 500 teachers, increased class sizes, and today we are still struggling to get back to those same student ratios that we had in the 2008-2009 period. I think those numbers are probably in the neighborhood of 800 to 900 teachers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
800 to 900 teachers, and today a loaded cost for a teacher is in the neighborhood of $85,000.
It's
$90,000, and so I'm perfectly clear that is not the average salary. When I say the loaded cost, I'm talking about the benefits, I'm talking about retirement system contributions, I'm talking about payroll taxes, and everything else associated with that employee. But $90,000 and times 9, that's $81 million, is that right? If we were to fund each one of those positions, $81 million. Okay, we do not have that kind of money. What I think does need to happen, I think is going to be vitally important, is for this Board of Education, this school district, to have a broader discussion with the community to really, really understand the difficulties and the challenges that we have before us. Because fortunately, we've led with very conservative leadership and listened to our superintendent. We've listened to our financial officer to basically earn us a AAA credit rating to provide the very best place that we can to teach and learn within Cobb County. And I really, really appreciate the efforts and the recommendations provided by you and also by the superintendent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Anyone else? Mr. Morgan.
I want to be abundantly clear. Nothing I just proposed, those 3 specific proposals, would be a wild swing in revenue, compromise our credit rating. The first 2 that I put up, one was $45,000, the other was $114,000. And nor would it impact, compromise, or in any way, shape, or form dip into reserves. So it's apples and oranges. Nothing. So if the position is, well, we are in good standing with our credit ratings, we all want to keep that. I could see if I was sitting up here saying this is going to impact our credit rating, dip into reserves. Nothing that I just said about raises impacts those things. What I mentioned was newcomers get a 4 millage. That's it. And how they could be executed. I want to be very tangible, black and white, what I'm saying. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. I guess Mr. Scamahorn.
Hopefully you listened or heard some of what I said, and I believe you listened. I'm confused. I mean, we're talking about $114,000. I mean, that's such a small portion. I mean, yes, we could hire a teacher with it. We can do some things with it. But from a $1 billion budget, and I had not seen your presentation. And so I wrote responses as I listened to yours. And what I'm trying to say is I'm still confused then as to how we want to go about doing it, because whether it's 114,000 or 114 million, we use efficiently as we can the money. So can you, in a sort of a summary way to help me, where do we get the money from and what are we talking about?
Sure. What I would say with that would be the superintendent could bring us back and say, hey, if you guys want to do that, these are some things as we were talking about in the back. These are some things you could trade out. These are some things, hey, if you want to do this. You want to find $45,000 in the budget, we can switch this out. In my mind,
that's true.
In my mind, that's how real budget conversations happen, right? Not just, here it is, okay. But that would be how I would say, hey, okay, you guys say you want to find 114 plus 45 is $159,000. Want to find $159,000 in the budget? Here are options, ma'am and sir, that you can consider. And then we could say yeah or no. But right now, there's very little of that happening. So that's how I would go about that, Mr. Cameron.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Chastain.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments, and I appreciate Mr. Morgan at least initiating the fact that we're going to have this discussion and we should keep discussing, as Mr. Sweeney said. Two things, though. First of all, the affordable suggestions that you made, I appreciate the fact that they're affordable, but I don't know how many people here, other than me, have worked for large corporations and different companies, but when you start allowing subjectivity in giving out bonuses and stuff and decided, because the evaluation, I believe, is still kind of a subjective thing, and it happens in offices and corporations all over the place where it doesn't necessarily, it may, let's say someone may get a bonus one year, but the system itself can create more disruptions and more consequences that are unanticipated. The other thing that I want to say something about the 5 mil fair share. I was very naive before I ever got on the board. I was aware of the 5 mil fair share, but I didn't fully understand it. In fact, my understanding has kind of evolved right over the last few years in front of everybody. I had the impression that when property taxes are collected for education and it goes to the state, that all those dollars somehow get redistributed for education somewhere else in the state. And so I was really disappointed when I found out that, oh no, we collect all this money for education from our citizens in Cobb County. And by the way, we do this at the risk of, if you don't pay your property taxes, you can lose your property. So we come along and say, okay, we want all this money for education, and then we send it to the state. And then after we get through the FTE account, and now we get our 5 mil, we get our QBE formula, there still is money that we collected for education from the taxpayers of Cobb County that sits with the state, but they put it in the general fund. And so where I used to think that all education dollars somehow ended up being used for books for our kids, some of what we collect for education ends up going into bridges and boat ramps. So that is one of the things that has concerned me. So back to what Mr. Sweeney was talking about, I think that we should be pursuing, and does anybody know a lobbyist, where we could go down to the state and maybe finally we just know that things are going to be different next fall after the election at the State House. And I would like to think that we could open up the conversation again through our legislative delegation or through other people who are concerned about education, that we work on this capping our 5 mil fair share at $100 million. And back to your presentation, Mr. Morgan, one of my concerns is when you hold up Gwinnett County, if we haven't said it lately, one of the things is Gwinnett County gets more money back after their 5 mil fair share than we do. So essentially, when you look at numbers in Gwinnett County, there's the theoretical possibility that Cobb County is actually subsidizing Gwinnett County through the way the 5 mil fair share works. I'll stop there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for my colleague, Mr. Chastain, if I might, Mr. Chair. First point you made were about evaluation and the subjectivity of it. So why don't we just cut out all evaluations? Why don't Chris stop evaluating his staff? Why don't all the principals, because of the subjectivity of it, because of the human element of it, why don't we just say because there could be error, because hey, you might get it, you might not. Nobody sitting over there is guaranteed a job beyond 1 year. Why don't we just cut out all evaluations then?
No, we don't need to cut out evaluations, but there is some subjectivity that goes with evaluations. And then when you see the monetary thing that comes with it, that is what can create concern. There's also evaluations in corporations, much like our bell curve that we use in grading in schools, where only so many people can be a 4. So 20% has to be a 1, or 10% is a 1, and then you have the 2s and the 3s. And management flows this down and says, this is how you will do your evaluations. You can't have all 4s. You can't have all 3s. So it is subjective.
All right, if I might respond very quickly to that, Mr. Chair. And in those sectors, the walls of Jericho have not come crashing down. They're thriving. They are having robust earnings. They're getting the best and the brightest. One of the things that always fascinates me, again, I said this at the beginning, whatever issue it is, if a person wants to keep things the way that they are, the top 1% get the same thing as the bottom quarter. They say it might create so much chaos, confusion, guys, I don't know what we're going to do. And I'm thinking, well, why in other sectors have the walls of Jericho not come crashing down? Why do we have people flourishing, businesses flourishing? But some kind of way in education, we say, oh, God, if we do that, we're going to have a crusade against education. I'm not able to connect the dots on that rationale, and I yield the floor of all comments, Mr. Chair.
If I may just respond, education, public education is a unique market. There is a market, there are participants, there's actors, there's supply, demand, but it is a government market. Unfortunately, our teachers cannot run out and bring in more revenue on their own. I mean, it's very hard. We place a lot of value. And by the way, let me just say this right now because it bothered me. Someone sent me an email, and I appreciate advocacy. I appreciate personal advocacy. But someone made it sound in an email, said you don't pay teachers because you don't value teachers. And I would like to say, having been the son of a teacher who watched my mother as a nurse make more money than my dad when he died, I appreciate the situation of teachers and don't ever think that I don't value what educators do. But it is a unique market. It has its unique, there's just unique characteristics, just like the defense contracting industry is unique. The legal markets are different. You can't, they're not, well, I hate to use the old apples and oranges thing, but that's it, apples and kumquats. People who come into the education industry, who come into the education market, understand that. But free individuals can decide, do I want to live here? Do I not want to live here? Do I want to live here, but do I want to work here? Am I willing to commute from here to here for this amount of pay, or do I want to live closer in? But we're not stopping people from making those decisions, but we are challenged and charged by the mission that we're on to work with limited resources and be good stewards of those resources, because there are a lot of people that don't have kids in our schools that are sitting on the sidelines. We're taking their money, and we're trying to be good stewards, and we have to answer them also. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chastain. Mr. Scamahorn? Final note.
I just wanted to reiterate what Mr. Chastain just said. He took a lot of my thunder, so I'll leave it at that. No, I'm glad you did. You probably said it better than I could, so thank you.
Where are we? Are we going to, Mr. Morgan, you want to make a motion?
No, I didn't have a motion to make.
Oh, okay, I'd like to take
You have agenda item number 4, the budget, approval of the budget, right?
Yeah.
I probably would ask Mr. Morgan, is the conversation in the context of approval of the budget.
What I brought, is it in context to the budget?
Yeah,
Yes.
trying to, okay, so
Yes.
I'm assuming then you may make motions when we get to agenda item number 4
Yes.
relative to your presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And I think that would be the best thing, because we didn't really notice this business as a motion item, but we certainly have
Yeah,
one coming up
that's a
here
good,
shortly.
that's a good fit. Let's, I'd like to take a 10-minute break here and then come back with superintendent's report.
Works.
Let's come back at 3:46. Thank you, sir. We're back. And now it's time for our superintendent's report, Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Mr. Brad Johnson to come and bring the quarterly financial report.
Good afternoon, Board. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Board, Mr. Superintendent. I'm presenting to you today the quarterly financial report for the third quarter of fiscal year 2018. This report reflects financial data for the 9-month period ending March 31st, 2018. I will briefly cover some highlights from the first 4 sections of the report, which are finance, cash management, school food service, and capital projects. The remaining data at the end of the report is presented for informational purposes and identifies payments and budget adjustments greater than $100,000. And as always, this report will be posted to our website to enable the public to review it. For today, I've placed a copy of the presentation at your desk, and you can follow along with this hard copy. You also have the complete third quarter financial report that has a black cover at your desk that you can refer to also during the presentation or later at your leisure. So first tab, please. The first section of the report is the first tab entitled Financial Report. This section contains a summary of the financial information for each of the district's individual funds, and as always, we focus on the general fund, which is the district's primary and largest fund. Please look at the pie chart behind the financial report on the screen. You will notice that as of March 31st, 75% of the fiscal year has elapsed, and we have collected 86% of total budgeted revenue, and we have expended or encumbered 74% of the expense budget. A broad review of current year general fund financial performance indicates that our revenue and collections and our expenditures are similar to the previous year. For revenue specifically, we have collected 86% of our revenues in the third quarter of the current year compared to 84% in the third quarter of the previous year, so we're doing slightly better. A review of expenditures shows that we have spent 74% of the budget through the end of the third quarter this year compared to 74% in the third quarter of last year. These figures indicate that the district is managing its current year budget, but you will remember that we have consistently communicated to the board that this year's budget continues to be tight. This report further justifies my high confidence level in the budget department with their estimates and the accounting department with their recording of revenues and expenditures, with the fact that we spent just slightly under 75% of the budget 2/3 of the way through the 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. Specifically, this expenditure estimate was only 1% off. This accuracy emphasizes how important we think it is to professionally plan and utilize taxpayer money efficiently. You should have confidence in these departments that they are operating at a high level. Slide number 2, please. This slide is a summary of revenue and expenditures as of March 31st, and it's by category. And the format of this report is that there are 2 sections down the left side of the report entitled Revenue and Expenditures. And across the top, there are multiple columns for original budget, revised budget, year-to-date actual expenditures, encumbrances, and then several metrics on the right side for over, under budget, and percent differences. In the first column, we begin showing that the original budget is $1,023,000,000 in revenue and $1,026,000,000 in expenditure appropriations, resulting in an original budgeted use of $3.2 million in total fund balance for 2018. Next, please look at the first category at the top of the report titled Revenue, and we begin with the original and revised budget of $1,023,000,000. Actual revenue collected through the third quarter was $882.7 million, which results in 86% of our revenue collected 3/4 of the way through the current fiscal year. Next, look at the second category titled Expenditures. For expenditures, we begin with an original budget of $1,026,000,000 in the first column, and in the second column, we show revisions to the expenditure budget. The board approved a property purchase and architect appointments. These changes, along with encumbrances from the previous year, revised the expenditure budget to $1,042 million. Actual expenditures of $762.8 million and $4 million in encumbrances results in the district having spent 74% of the budget 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year. The next slide, please. The next slide in the presentation is cash management. In cash management, that's the first schedule in this section, and we have earned $2.9 million so far this year in interest income in all funds for the 9 months ended March 31st, 2018, compared to $1.1 million last year at this same time last year. The weighted average of return as of March 31st was 1.2%. So unfortunately, interest rates have been extremely low for quite some time now, but it does appear that they are slowly continuing to rise now and for the foreseeable future, but it will be slow. I can comment that the Federal Reserve has raised their key rate interest rates, and on the positive side, hopefully banks will continue to slowly raise their rates on investments as a result of this action. But on the negative side, we have found that it appears that banks are in the process of increasing their banking rates. So our current 1.2% weighted average rate of return is higher than last year's weighted average of 0.5%. So we are hopeful that rates will continue to move upward even slightly. Despite the low rates, we can regularly consult with our financial advisor, Courtney Knight, of the PFM Group in order to obtain the best possible market rate of return, while at the same time ensuring that our investments are safe. Next slide, please. The next section of the report that I want to present is the food service report. This report shows meal-related activity at each school for both the current month and the fiscal year to date. For fiscal year 2018, overall in the third quarter, elementary schools show a loss of $1.1 million. Middle schools show a loss of $3,400. High schools have a profit of $158,000. And finally, the other section, which is essentially interest income and USDA commodities and equipment purchases, a profit of $182,000. All of these combined show a net total program loss 3/4 of the way through the year of $824,000. Now, I do have some comments on that. One of the reasons that there is a loss at this point in the year, you will remember that we did have hurricane days and we had snow days, and there were 7 of them. So we lost that many days of revenue, and that hurt in the operation of the program this year. We also had equipment purchases, and we had insurance costs beginning in January. But this is a good example of the need for fund balance, because the food service has a good fund balance, and that won't impact the program that very much. And so the fund balance right now is approximately 2 months, and it's probably around in the range of $16 million. Next slide, please. The next section of the quarterly report I'd like to present is the SPLOST and capital projects section. These sections reflect revenue and expenditures in the capital project funds. This includes SPLOST 3, SPLOST 4, and the countywide building fund. One thing I'd like to point out in the next section is illustrated in the SPLOST 4 tab, and that's on your presentation at your desk and on the screen. This schedule shows that collections for the SPLOST 4 program exception to date are $538 million and are coming in below forecast projections, or about 8.1% below projections. But we do have some comments on these revenue projections. The district is continuing to monitor SPLOST revenues to identify trends in sales tax collections. The state of Georgia economy continues to improve, which might assist in bringing in additional revenue through the current SPLOST 4 program. Major projects such as the new Braves Stadium could provide additional sales tax revenue, and it is anticipated that the district could collect approximately $27 million in state construction funding that could possibly assist in capital building programs. So, Mr. Chair, this concludes the presentation of the third quarterly financial report for 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any questions? Okay, next, Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, could you turn to tab countywide building and give us a synopsis of what that entails?
Countywide Building Fund has traditionally been a way to track general capital projects funding. And traditionally, things like interest income and things have been put into that fund. But also, what we use it primarily for now is portable classrooms. And that money is generated, we transfer from the general fund, and then we track it in this fund.
Okay, then we've sold several properties. Some we've collected money on, some we haven't. Where does that money go?
Well, we will record that as revenue in the school district. And right now, we've recorded one property so far, and we've recorded that in the general fund.
Okay, so it's all going into Fund Code 100?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Scamahorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Johnson, just a real quick question. If we overspend our revenues, will the state reimburse us or give us more money?
Are you referring to the general fund?
Yes, sir. I'm referring to all monies, 1.069 billion.
We don't overspend. I mean, we stick to a plan. We have a budget, and we stick to that plan.
I kind of heard some arrogance in that. You heard that right there?
Yeah, absolutely. He acts like he knows what he's doing.
We don't overspend.
There you go. But Big Daddy's not out there to help us if we made that mistake, though, is he? Or she, Big Mama?
Actually, our financial system provides assistance in that because it won't let us overspend. If people want to put in something and they don't have enough money in their budget, it won't go through.
Okay. I think I've made my point, and you have too. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scamahorn. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The supplemental budget that's done at generally the beginning of the calendar year, that does affect our budget revenue. Is that correct?
Are you referring to the midterm adjustment?
Yes.
We try to account for that when we pass the original budget.
Okay, so you're
And
saying...
we try to estimate it.
Okay. All right, so it would not change our budget for the next fiscal year then?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Banks. Anybody else? If not, it's time to our board agenda items. Mr. Ragsdale, you want to go with that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Agenda item number 1 is the monthly recurring item of authorization of school properties disposal per District Administrative Rule DO-R. That list has been submitted electronically. Be happy to answer any questions.
Consent?
All right. Agenda item number 2. I'm going to ask Ms. Jennifer Lawson to come forward and bring the agenda item number 2. And as she's coming, just the definition, what this is Carl Perkins funds.
This item is for approval of the local plan for vocational education and one-year funding application for fiscal year 2019. The Perkins Program Improvement Funding for Cobb County School District is calculated by the Georgia Department of Education. The funding is based on the small area income and poverty estimates created by the U.S. Census Bureau. System CTA supervisor prepares a local plan to allocate funding based on the 9 required and 15 permissive uses of the Perkins Program Improvement Funds. Funds may be used to improve, enhance, and expand CTA programs of study. All aspects of the use of Perkins funds must be supported by data, rationale, local school improvement plan, and the district must have the capacity to measure students and program improvement resulting from the use of the Perkins grant.
Questions? I've got a question. Can any of these funds be used for training of staff?
They are, yes, sir. We use approximately, our budget, for example, last year, software, computer, and other expendable was 70%, technology supplies and supplemental was 10, professional development that you're asking about was approximately 15 of our budget, and 5% administrative expenses.
I guess the next question is this an increase from last year?
We have indeed gone up over the last few years. The way the grant works is we're allocated, district funds match it, and as we expend it out, we earn more money. So, for example, fiscal year 17 was $684,267. In 18, it was $693,425.
Thank you. Consent? Consent.
All right, agenda item number 3 and 4. I wasn't sure about 3, but I see Brad Johnson moving toward the podium. So number 3 will be Brad Johnson, as is number 4, which is the budget.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, agenda item number 3 is a recommendation for approval of a loan for Kennesaw Mountain High School marching band uniforms in accordance with board policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting. A short-term loan program is available for assisting high schools with the purchase of marching band uniforms. Kennesaw Mountain is requesting a loan in the amount of $40,000 to be repaid over the next 5 years in accordance with board policy. The administration recommends the approval of this agenda item.
Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, can you give us some background on how the schools actually come up with the amount of money they need? So I know we've approved several loans in the past, but it seems like it's either $40 million, $45 million, or thousands, or $50,000. So do they just do we just give them a lump sum, or do they come up with an actual number of what they actually need?
It's my assumption that they're looking at uniforms and they price those out. They determine how many they need and how many people are in the band, and they make a loan request accordingly.
Well, that's not going to come out to an even number. So do we actually loan them the actual dollar amount, or do we just give them the $40,000?
We loan them the money and they pay it back over 5 years.
So it's not the actual money, it's a loan of $40,000. So they could, if they have some surplus, they can use that also.
Right.
So like this is North Cobb. If North Cobb really needed $50,000, then I'm curious what, we used the words for, the actual amount, but I'm just wondering if we should use the word up to 40,000 or up to 50,000, so that they whatever they need, they get, and they don't have to get the whole $40,000.
Mr. Banks, the way the board policy reads, it reads that the maximum loan that a school can request will not exceed $50,000. It sounds like Kennesaw Mountain's being responsible. They're just asking for the amount that they really need.
Okay. I was just curious, how we.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Consent? Consent. Number 4, Brad.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, Mr. Superintendent, today marks the continuation of our FY 2019 budget presentations and discussions with the board. The CCSD annual budget development process is probably one of the most impactful strategic tasks that the board engages in each year. In a previous budget meeting on March 15th, we reviewed the 2019 budget calendar and the FY 2019 budget overview and tentative budget. At the April 19th budget meeting, we presented additional information on the budget to present, as well as detailed budget data to assist you as board members in the budget development process. The 2019 budget notebook was distributed to each board member along with the 2019 budget information and estimates for other funds. On this date, the board approved the tentative budget. All of this budget information was posted on the internet for review by Cobb County citizens. Mr. Chair, the document for presentation today is the most current revised 2019 budget overview, which is an executive summary of the 2019 general fund tentative budget for consideration for the board, and it's the big yellow sheet at your desk tonight. Highlights of the tentative budget for 2019 include the following. The FY 2019 tentative general fund budget presented today is balanced. The proposal continues to utilize $7.8 million in fund balance, which follows a $3.2 million of use of fund balance last year. The proposal contains no millage increase, as the millage rate presented remains at 18.9 mils. The proposal continues to contain a salary step for eligible employees based on their salary schedule. This step could range anywhere from an average of 1.5% to 3%. The proposal continues to contain a 1.1% bonus for non-238-day employees. The proposal continues to contain a decrease in the work year for 238-day employees in lieu of bonus. In addition to the highlights I've already presented, it was presented previously that additional funds earned as a result of the elimination of the austerity cuts be used for several items. Number one, the superintendent recommended that a 1.1% salary increase for all permanent employees with a cost of $9 million. That's in item number 10. And then also additional instructional positions. So we had a discussion of the pool positions and how we, the number of teachers needed at the beginning of the school year might vary, and we don't know how many number of students will show up at each school location. And we discussed the importance of having a pool. And so we used the balance of that austerity refunded money to increase the pool from 6 positions to 19 positions. Mr. Chair, these are my comments. And we presented in detail, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Discussion? Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Just a quick question on the agenda item. Agenda item number 4 on the detail here, it shows the general fund expenditures, which are represented in your yellow sheet. Then it also represents other funds. What are the other funds?
Mr. Sweeney, the other funds are a variety of self-supporting funds and grants. And we presented to the board in detail in the budget notebook about the other funds. There are special revenue funds, things like Title I and Special Ed IDEA, donations, facility use, after-school program, public safety, tuition school, those types of funds that some are grants, some are self-supporting. We also have in there the countywide building fund, and then we also have the internal service funds, which are unemployment, self-insurance, and the warehouse and flexible benefits that we track separately so that we can track them just right so we maintain and track those costs correctly. The total of other funds, I don't have the agenda item right in front of me, and I can't read it either.
It's roughly $137 million for the expenditures.
Yes. I'm getting old, Mr. Chair.
We'll make sure, we'll have to get a monitor up there at the lectern. All right, thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Discussion or consent? Discussions? Okay. We have the approval of the agenda. If there's no objection, our agenda is approved. And at this time, we will take a 5-minute recess before we start our training. Let's go ahead now and entertain a motion to go into executive session for personnel, land, and legal after training.
And we also have a student appeal as well for the executive session.
No objection?
So-
The motion, Mr. Sweeney?
So,
Hang on,
Mr. Chair,
guys.
Mr. Chair, I make a recommendation that we adjourn to executive session following our training. The executive session discussion, land, legal, personnel, and a student discipline matter.
Correct. Ms. Thayer, second. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. So we'll now at recess. We'll be back at 4:17.
We'll be back at 7 o'clock.